everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Gita Mary and today we are going to look at the impact of animal agriculture and factory farming. We're going to look at how animal agriculture started and how it slowly evolved into what we know today, because I do really believe that in order to understand the impact and the complications with factory farming as we see it today, we need to understand where it comes from. I also have other videos about going vegan and my own story with going vegan, my own implications with food and how to start going vegan. I have all of these videos already, so I kind of want to take this video into another direction, which is why we're going to start with the origins of animal agriculture. And you know where that starts? In Mesopotamia. The history of animal agriculture starts with the domestication of goats and sheep 11,000 to 15,000 years ago in old Mesopotamia. Herd animals were the first animals to be domesticated by people because a lot of benefits came from having a herd close to your home domesticated. First of all, it was a steady food supply, and that has something that has kept people from dying for many, many years. Herd animals also meant a level of protection that you could not achieve without it. It also meant easy access to fibers to make clothes. It also meant easy access to animal hides, aka skins, which early humans used to make tents, clothing, storage bags, all this kind of stuff. And animals in herds were also great workforces. So it meant that people could cultivate more land, it meant that people could transport goods longer distances, and it meant that people could move around more frequently and more freely than they could before. To early humans, the domestication of animals meant that they were able to not starve to death and to not freeze to death, both of which are pretty neat. Around 15,000 years ago, yes, I know, it's a very long time ago, but it's very important. Early humans started transitioning from nomadic hunter-gatherers onto more settled stationary communities. And this made it possible to domesticate both pigs and cows as well. This also meant that communities started to grow bigger and bigger. But did early humans live in this symbiotic harmony with nature? Not exactly. When the first humans reached Australia 45,000 years ago, their hunting practices caused 90% of large mammals to go extinct. And when the first humans reached America 15,000 years ago, their hunting practices caused 75% of large mammals to go extinct. Early humans drove 50% of all large animals in the world to extinction, way before they planted their first wheat field or way before they made their first metal tool. With the domestication of animals came selective breeding. This is done when you remove the option of reproducing from this animal and you only let animals with good traits reproduce. This means that you can sort of gradually make cows produce more milk, which we do today. It also means that you can make animals bigger, produce more eggs, produce more wool. The early wild chicken weighed about 2 pounds, but over time we've bred chickens to weigh as much as 17 pounds. Additionally, wild chickens would hatch a small number of eggs a year, while domesticated chickens today lay more than 200 eggs. And this is all due to selective breeding. As such, both plant and animals that we have domesticated today have very little in common with their early ancestors. While animals have played a historically crucial role in terms of human survival, capability and technology, which we all have to admit that it has, there has also been downsides to the domestication of animals, apart from the extinction of wildlife. For one, as humans started to keep various animals in their homes, like chickens, goats, pigs, others, the risk of disease spreading from animals to humans became a serious threat to the health of several communities. This risk would over time increase as communities, populations, and the amount of livestock grew bigger. Prior to the 20th century, the best well-known zoonoses were rabies, anthrax, glanders, tuberculosis, plague, yellow fever, influenza, as well as certain zoonotic parasitic diseases. Actually, humans have only successfully domesticated around 20 animals, which seems like nothing compared to the thousands of animals that are in existence today, and even more animals were in existence during the time of the early humans. However, today, over 90% of all animals on Earth are livestock. Both the domestication of animals and the ability to cultivate land for plants have been the main reason why humans were able to evolve skills, communication, culture, and so much more. When humans went from spending the majority of our days searching for food to be able to produce more food in less time close to our homes, we suddenly had free time that opened up to learn new skills. The advantages of animals is, however, not just something left in history books. While some countries have very little use for animals for labor today, this is not the case everywhere. Today in developing countries, animals provide as much as 99% of the power used in agriculture, while 20% of the world's population depend on animals for moving goods, which means that animals still play a crucial role in many people's lives. Also, I think I should preface this by saying that there are tons of things that I won't be able to mention in this video due to the sheer issue of time. There were many, as in many advances and developments made in human history, like how the Greeks learned how to combine two plants to make apples, pears and plums 3000 years BC, or how we as communities started organizing and specializing in certain trades, aka the invention of jobs, or how the colonials in America based their food supply on livestock and thus deliberately cut off indigenous communities' food supply by forcing wild animals to relocate. A lot of stuff has happened. Okay, so now we are going to jump a little bit in time. What we call meat and what we call animals is actually really important, and there's a long history behind this adaptability of culinary names. And it all started with the Norman conquest of Britain in 1066. The French took over England and French words began influencing British culture. Cow became beef once it went from being an animal to ingredients, pig became pork, sheep became mutton, and calf became veal, and so on and so forth. Because most Anglo-Saxons were hunters and lower class, they kept using the same words for the animal and for the meat, while the finer establishments and the upper class had no affiliation with the production, breeding, capture or slaughter of the animal, and thus started using fancy new culinary descriptions. As such, English speakers started adapting words like bœuf, poulet, pork, venison, mouton. So renaming meats have had a significant effect on how meat is perceived and play a vital part in separating the idea of a living animal from its consumable parts. And now we'll make another time jump. Prior to the development of the 1800s, farmers had let their livestock run freely. Every farmer had a very small number of animals because a farm only had to export goods to very few people very close by. It was in the 1800s that farmers started fencing in their livestock for the first time. I think it's also really interesting to note that a lot of the technological development made within this time period started already in the Renaissance, and then again right before the 1800s in the Age of Enlightenment, because people were really curious about how to efficiently develop technology that would make life easier and make things more efficient. But bear in mind that even with all of these advances in the 1800s, factory farming was still far from being invented. Because factory farming was invented during the 1920s in the US. And I think this is a pretty good time to include a definition of the word factory farming. Factory farming is a system of rearing livestock using highly intensive methods, by which poultry, pigs and cattle are confined indoors under strictly controlled conditions. The first animal to be farmed on a large scale were chickens, and for nearly 50 years chickens was the only animal farmed in such a large number. With the invention of antibiotics in the 30s, farmers were able to have more livestock without the increased risk of disease, and this led to a huge boom in the production of meat, dairy and eggs. I also really recommend watching the documentary Eating Animals, because it talks a lot about factory farming and how it came to be and what a lot of the issues are, and it also includes a lot of perspective from factory farmers. It was also during this period that farmers intensively bred selected chickens to increase egg production. In the 1970s we began to see the mass production of pigs, and shortly after cows were included in the factory farming operation as well. And this leads us to today. In 2020, roughly 94% of all animals farmed for human consumption are raised on factory farms, which are also referred to as concentrated animal feeding operations. I know, idyllic. And now this brings us to today's environmental impact of factory farming. Today, more than 70 billion animals are slaughtered every single year, and it has a huge impact on the environment. So let's get into it. This is arguably here the video should have started, but I think all the previous information is really important in order to grasp and understand and take into account all the factors that made this thing so problematic and impactful. I'm just gonna stop talking and start talking. The factory farming sector is responsible for 37% of global methane emissions, and methane is a greenhouse gas that is 20 times more potent than CO2. Factory farming is also responsible for 64% of all ammonia emissions, and in the US they're actually responsible for between 50 to 80% of all ammonia emissions. Here's a look at the top 5 sectors of metric tons ammonia emissions per year. The industry also produces harmful compounds like hydrogen sulfide, which pose serious health risks to people. It accounts for 65% of nitrous oxide emissions, a greenhouse gas that is 300 times more potent than CO2. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, animal ag sector, which includes the production of feed, crops, the manufacturing of fertilizer, and the shipment of meat, eggs, and dairy, is responsible for 18% of all global CO2 emissions. Between 1990 and 2006, methane emissions from pigs and dairy cows manure in the United States increased by 34 and 49%. This increase, according to the US Environmental Protection Agency, is a result of the shift towards confining pigs and cows in larger facilities and using liquid manure management systems. Now let's talk about deforestation. In the United States alone, over 260 million acres of forest have been cleared to make room for crop fields, most of which are used exclusively to grow food for livestock. Paper production accounts for about 20% of global deforestation, while a whopping 75% of all deforestation happening in the Brazilian rainforest is caused by animal agriculture. The majority of the land cleared is to make room to grow feed for livestock, primarily corn and soy, and this feed is used by farms everywhere in the world, including Denmark. A lot of it by Denmark. Only 6% of all soy grown in the world is meant for human consumption. The majority of it is meant for animal feed. Deforestation for animal grazing and feed crops emit approximately 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. Furthermore, in the US, 41% of all land is used for livestock and animal feed production. In Denmark, we use about 2/3 of our entire country for agriculture, and most of it, the majority of it, is animal agriculture. Why? Well, mostly because feeding a cow takes a lot more than feeding a human. The general ratio of feed that goes into, for instance, a cow and the amount of meat that is produced is 1 to 3, meaning that switching to plant-based agriculture for human consumption will take up a lot less space. Now let's take a look at water pollution and water usage in animal agriculture. First of all, it requires generally a lot of water to produce meat because you have to produce feed for the animals before you slaughter them. It takes more than 1,800 liters of water to produce 1 pound of beef, which is the equivalent of an average person's drinking water in 7 years. Industrial agriculture uses about 70% of the world's freshwater supply and brings about 75% of all water quality related problems in America's rivers and streams alone. For a perspective, only less than 1% of all the water in the world is accessible and usable to people. While manure and waste from livestock can be used as fertilizer, an overwhelming amount of it is washed out in waterways. Actually, livestock produce more than 1 million tons of manure every day in the US, and that is simply too much to use on fields. Most of it is stored in huge concrete storage units, which have a tendency to leak and overflow into waterways, and that is a huge problem. Because manure contains a lot of really harmful components, along with, and perhaps most importantly, undigested antibiotics, which means that the water this manure comes in contact with will now also have traces of this antibiotic, and we use water quite a lot in our everyday lives. And perhaps you think, well, need free medicine. Sadly, this overexposure to antibiotics will create drug-resistant bacteria, making it harder and harder to prevent diseases spreading between people, and moreover, an exposure to antibiotics will also make it increasingly difficult to cure previously easily treatable conditions. When drug-infused manure is washed into waterways, they also create dead zones with toxic algae. Manure-polluted water also results in an increased level of phosphorus and nitrogen, causing big health issues for people, as well as oxygen deprivation and nutrition pollution in the water, destroying basically all aquatic life in these areas. Now let's talk a little bit about monocultures. This is not something that exclusively is a problem when it comes to animal agriculture. This is something that is a problem when it comes to any sort of agriculture. But because animal agriculture is the type of agriculture, I've said agriculture quite a few times at this point, but because animal ag is something that affects the entire sector to the degree to which it does, it is especially important to talk about it in this context. With a constantly growing industry, factory farming requires a lot more feed for its livestock, and general modern agriculture has resulted in an overwhelming amount of cultivated land, the majority of which is to feed livestock. This creates monocultures, which means that a large area of land only hosts one type of plant. This completely disrupts ecosystems because animals cannot thrive without natural diversity. The biggest monocultures in the world include wheat, corn, soybeans, and rice, and only a small percentage is still grown for humans. Furthermore, growing a monoculture requires large amounts of synthetic fertilizer, which is actually based on petroleum, aka plastic. There is so many overlaps, and I don't even have time to get into that part of animal agriculture as well, but there's so many instances and sectors within the industry of animal ag, and specifically factory farming, where the fossil fuel industry and the factory farming industry benefit from each other in a symbiotic relationship. So we really cannot say no more factory farming without also saying no more fossil fuels, and we cannot say no more fossil fuels without also impacting factory farming, because these two are in so many ways combined. When using large amounts of synthetic fertilizer, we starve off insects, bees, and we also destroy soil and water. How do we move forward? Animal agriculture, and specifically factory farming, has been what seems to be an inevitable invention. The increase and advances made in our food systems, although both highly problematic and unsustainable, are often seen as necessary strides towards a healthy economy, with the start of factory farming happening right around the Great Depression. Furthermore, the consumption of meat has historically been something that has kept humans safe and alive for literally thousands of years. However, the industry as it looks today is unsustainable and has already had great ecological consequences. If the industry keeps increasing as it is doing right now, we will have no more healthy soil in 60 years. Today, most consumers have basically no relationship with the production of their food other than buying it in a grocery store. And that, along with the global norm of using culinary language to describe meats, this has led us to a place where we have very little understanding and empathy for this part of our consumer culture. Most consumers have been separated from the production of their food, which also means that we tend to value food less, waste food more, and feel very little responsibility for our purchases. I could also make an entire video about how the ability to choose certain foods over others come with immense privilege. We could also talk about how tons of indigenous communities all around the world have been plant-based for thousands of years, and how some people today live in food deserts where there are literally no other choice than that one grocery store. In the context of the environmental impact of factory farming, it doesn't really matter, or I don't personally care, if you identify as vegan, vegetarian, or meat eater. We have to face the inevitable fact that the way we produce meat today, whether or not you support the industry or not, is unsustainable and needs to change. And I hope that people who eat meat as well can see this too. Even if you're impacted by the industry, even if you benefit from the industry, we should be able to admit that something needs to change. Whether or not you think that humans biologically are meant to eat meat, I have also made videos about these sort of comments and these sort of standpoints and where I am about their sort of sources, and I've made videos explaining all of this as well. My point is here that it doesn't matter if you think humans are natural omnivores or humans are naturally meant to digest meat. It doesn't really matter, because the way most people consume meat today is not only unnatural, it also happens to unhealthy and unnecessary extents, and the way we produce food today is unsustainable, unhealthy, and unnatural, no matter what you think natural early humans tended to do. The fact that factory farming needs to change is also something many farmers agree with. I don't think we can change this industry overnight. That would be economically unsustainable as well, but there are lots of things we can do to push our food systems in a more sustainable direction. Can we change our food systems and our world and our planet without also changing ourselves a little bit? No, we also kind of have to change ourselves a teeny tiny bit in order to inspire bigger change. But a lot of the stuff that needs to happen is also something that consumers have very little control over. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do to inspire sustainable change in the food system and in your home. First of all, base your meals on seasonal and local veggies. These have the lowest carbon footprint, they're often easy to get without plastic, and they're often easy to get from local farmers, which is tons better than buying imported fruit and veg. You can also reduce meat, eggs and dairy in your diet. I have tons of beginners guides and guides to people who have really very little if no experience with cooking without these ingredients, and how you can start making dishes without these ingredients. You can also watch my story on how I went from being an anti-vegan to being a vegan for life if you need some anecdotal inspiration. Spoiler alert, you don't really need to go vegan overnight. You don't even need to go vegan or identify with the label to inspire sustainable change. First of all, not everyone is able to go vegan. Some people have health issues that make that really, really possible. Some people have very, very tight budgets and live in food deserts. Again, that makes it really difficult, but we can all start by cutting out the products with the highest carbon footprint, like products from cows and sheep, and work your way down the list from highest carbon footprint to lowest carbon footprint. That's a really, really neat way of starting to learn how to reduce animal products without feeling like you have to cut out everything overnight. Order plant-based meals whenever you're out at restaurants. This is something that I did in the beginning of my journey as well, because I didn't really know how to cook good vegan or plant-based food. But when I went out to restaurants, specifically vegan and plant-based restaurants, I tried ordering something that I didn't know how to make myself, and I would draw inspiration from it. And also it's a really good way of demystifying vegan food. If you're at a restaurant where they both have meat dishes and vegetarian or vegan dishes, then go for the vegetarian or vegan dishes instead. You can also request meatless Mondays or vegetarian or vegan dishes in your cafeteria, in your workplace, and your school. You can also start cooking with plant-based alternatives to milk, butter, eggs, anything like that. You don't need to identify with the vegan label to use vegan product, because they are for everybody. I started cooking with oat milk and veggie butter rather than the dairy products, and you cannot even taste the difference. And lastly, and possibly very importantly, vote for politicians with green, ambitious sustainability policies, because this is so important. If we do not have policies and governments and politicians that favor sustainability rather than the industry, we're going to have a problem. It's not your fault that chicken nuggets are less expensive than carrots. There's so many parts of our food systems that are so faulty, that make it so difficult for lots and lots of people to make sustainable diet choices. And the place where all of this starts is with policies demanding more responsibility and making more restrictions for the animal ag sector. A lot of this starts with policies ensuring that people are favored over industries, and as it looks right now, that is not the case a lot of places. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you liked it, I hope it was helpful, and I hope you learned something. If you really liked it, you can also share it with other people that might need that extra push to really understand what their purchases mean and what this industry is responsible for. I hope you will comment here, like it up, and make sure this is seen by as many people as we possibly can. Thank you so much for supporting me, and have an amazing day, and take really good care of yourselves. Until next time. Bye! Thank you so much for watching this video, and also a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys help me create green, zero-waste content, and I love you guys. You can find the links to my social media accounts down below and the link to my Patreon on this screen. Bye!